and warm Pacific greetings to everyone who's joining in. Thank you so much for joining us for this Get Safe Online webinar. And I'm joined by 4 amazing panelists. My name is Annie, and I will be your moderator for this time. And I am live or coming on to this recording from Fiji. And so we have panelists from all across the region as well. And so we're super excited to get this conversation started for safe online payments. We know that after last year's COVID-19 pandemic, there were a lot of interactions that took place online, including more and more electronic payments being done and person to person. Buying and selling, especially with different platforms, social media platforms and other platforms that were available online for us to be able to interact, especially since we were all at home most of the time. So with that, we're kicking off this discussion with a brief introduction from our 4 amazing panel members, and I will ask them to introduce themselves, starting with Tajeshwari from Fiji.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tajeshwari. You can call me Taj as well. And I am from Fiji. I represent the Get Safe Online, and I am the ambassador for the same. Thank you.
Naka, thank you, Taj, for joining us. And we have Andy from Papua New Guinea.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. My name is Andy. I'm attached to the Consumer Affairs branch of NICTA. For those of you who may not know, NICTA is actually the National ICT Authority responsible for the regulation of ICT services in PNG. A part of NICTA's role and mandate also includes consumer protection, especially in the space of retail services and online safety. And I am actually also a GSO advocate for PNG, and I'm happy to be here today. Thank you, Anne.
Awesome. Thank you, Andy, for joining us from Papua New Guinea. And we have Suetena from Samoa.
Hello, everyone. Very warm greetings to you all from Samoa. My name is Sotena, as Anne has alluded earlier, and I am the Assistant Chief Executive Officer for the Information and Communication Technology for the Ministry of Communication and Information Technology for Samoa. I work closely with the team to coordinate certain elements of digital transformation as well as ICT initiatives across the government. And recently, cybersecurity has been one of the core agendas for the government to actually address. We believe that cybersecurity is one of the things that we need to be placed on a high importance since that digital transformation is moving things from the traditional means of analog systems to digital systems, and having that insurance of knowing that these platforms that are going online are well secured and well established in terms of how the population use them for both safety and their privacy. So I thank Get Safe Online for having us on board, and Samoa looks forward to working with the team in the region. And I see some of the familiar faces in the panel, and I'm also one of the Get Safe Online ambassador representing Samoa across the region in terms of activities that the GSO has arranged for our Blue Pacific. So we look forward to the future of a safe and secure internet. And thank you again for having us online.
That's awesome. Thank you, Suetena. And we also have with us Peter from Fiji.
Hey, good luck, everybody. Peter Ringamoto. I am the head of legal and regulatory for Digicel Pacific across 5 countries, which is Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, Vanuatu, and Nauru. Having worked across the Pacific for the last 11 years, and in telecoms, and looking forward to getting safer online with everybody. Thank you.
Awesome. And that's such a great kickoff to this discussion. I know we can all see that Andy has a background for Safer Internet Day, which took place earlier this month, and it was celebrated or commemorated throughout the region and throughout the country as well. And we all want a better internet. We all want a safer, more secure online experience for our countries and for our region. Particularly when it comes to making online payments, we're really excited to kick off the discussion with safe online payments, and then follow that up with a bit of discussion on credit cards and cryptocurrency. And then we'll also be touching a little bit on data protection, and then we'll end the conversation or the discussion for this afternoon with the Ambassador Day, or the Get Safe Online Ambassador Day that's coming up. And so in terms of conversations, we'll kick off with this first question of what are some of the most common online payment scams, and what are some risks that are related to online payments? And this question is posed to both Tajeshwari and Andy.
So the common online payment scams may include phishing first, which is very common here in Fiji. We have been receiving quite a lot of emails nowadays stating that someone is pretending to be someone. There's lots of people emailing from fake IDs, and they have the goal to get access to our personal information, including credit card details, IDs, and passwords. So the most common online payment scam includes phishing. The other one is the risk. The risk is the credit card fraud. We usually have the credit card in our hands, and we need to ensure that we keep it with us, because our credit cards the credit card includes the PIN numbers, or maybe the numbers at the back, and those can easily be accessible to people and individual that may try to purchase a product from your site using that stolen credit card, if it's been stolen, or the information stolen from the credit card, because those information on the credit cards are the details that are actually required to perform the online payments.
Thanks, Tajesh. Thanks, Anne. I think for PNG's case, we have had a lot of instances when it comes to scams around SMS lottery scams, where the perpetrators claim to offer windfall prizes in exchange for some form of upfront payment, especially to unsuspecting victims. And similar to Fiji, we also have our fair share of phishing or hoax emails, again by fraudsters who usually pose as representatives of reputable firms or companies. I think in terms of the risks from a consumer's perspective, consumers, a lot of consumers for us are still not knowledgeable on how to recognize the red flags when confronted with such a situation. And we're also finding that a lot of them tend to sort of trust the person that is scamming them, believing that what they're scamming them with is actually genuine. So those are some of our basic observations around complaints in that area. Another common thing we find is the use of weak passwords, which then compromises their privacy. So just some perspective from the view of our consumer complaints with Nectar.
Thank you for sharing that. That's, excuse me, that's also, I think, a bit of a reflection around the region as well, just in terms of how we are so welcoming and how much we have such a Pacific spirit to trust anybody that we greet in person. And so we bring that culture with us online as well, which is almost a double-edged sword when it comes to online payments in particular, and being able to counter the risks that we have online. And so just in terms of some of the scams and some of the risks that we face when it comes to online payments, how can people actually avoid being scammed? And that question lies with Soitena.
Thanks, Anne. I think just to add a little bit more oil to what you had noted in terms of culture, in the Pacific, we are a communal group, and if you look at our past ancestral developments, traditionally we built inherent trust in our culture. If you look at the way that information is being distributed in the traditional methods, it's from the elder to the next of kin. Like those who will be the leaders of tomorrow, they are given that information. But because we're a communal people, we tend to neglect the fact that what we share might always be good for our communities, but because that is now changing, that we're becoming more modernized, and from that modernization, we tend to forget that it's not just our communities that are sharing the information now. It's everybody, and that close circle where you would hear the old man and the old woman like gather around the campfires and tell those stories. There's that perimeter that information cannot pass through. So in answering the question about scam, it goes back to the fundamental understanding of what a scam, what does a scam wish to achieve in terms of its plan. So basically what scammers are actually targeting is the human aspect of everyone, that the aspect that you don't know the process to the full extent. There's a lack of knowledge in terms of the necessary information that you might have. And then playing on the fact that in the Pacific, this is also prevalent because we have this inherent trust type of understanding. Like all you need to show us behind the screen is a picture of your mother or your father or even your brother and sister, and saying, oh, this is so-and-so, and with no audio, with no video, and you just unknowingly chat with these people, and you think that these are these are your brothers and sisters that are either overseas or online, and then you forget that these are people hiding behind aliases. So the internet has made scammers more prevalent and more, in some way, a sustainable business. And because of that fact, scammers are now targeting those that are vulnerable, those that the low-hanging fruits, those that would trust what they see. But in terms of how you can protect yourself, is we need to learn as a community what these companies, what the process are for these companies. For example, you need to verify who they are. You maybe ask, do you have an ID? Are you from the local company? Can I verify you before we continue on this discussion with someone? Like, can you provide me a second verification personnel in the same company? Can I come down to your local business and start a conversation there? Do you have some sort of national identification that I could use? Like asking them to identify themselves, that in the case that you do find out that they are someone that they say they are not, that you can take this to the law enforcement or to the law and say, this is the information I have for someone that I have been talking with. I'm not sure if this person is actually a employee of this company, and then the law can enact in terms of those areas where they approach the company and they verify if this person actually works there, and then from there you can actually provide the tools that either the government have for cross-national engagements and take it to that next level, because with the internet, it's borderless. And that also builds the difficulties that not everything that you can address locally can be addressed locally. You will need to coordinate those instruments that the country has in terms of reaching out to. So for example, I might be in Samoa, but the scammer is probably from a country in Asia or a country in Europe, and we might not have the laws, or we might not have we might not have the linkages to actually go after those type of perpetrators online. So in essence, I think we need to educate our people. The businesses need to do their work in terms of promoting their services in a clear and concise way, like giving the public understanding that this is what we do, this is how we do it, and if you do have a problem online, these are the portals or the contact lines that you can call us on and address your concerns. So I think in terms of those, it's actually, we could apply the zero trust policy where you don't trust everything that you see online. You have to verify before you actually engage in those areas. So just to add to that question.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I think we could all agree in terms of that process of verification and being able to, as much as we trust individuals and we trust our families, and we have this specific way and the specific culture, we can also have almost this responsibility to ask for the verification, that we can ask people to indicate that they are the people that they say that they are, and they are the businesses that they say they represent. And so that's a really good segue into this question of how can individuals, or how can somebody, how would somebody be able to tell whether they are making a reliable online payment, a reliable online payment, and how can somebody, or what indicators would there be for making sure that you are actually making a reliable online payment and you're not just sending screenshots of your entire bank account that you've deposited into this particular bank account. And so, Peter, would you like to elaborate on how that's, or what indicators that we could be looking out for?
Thanks, Anne. I was just thinking, in terms of indicators, it also ties in with avoidance to some extent as well. But just taking a big step back, I think there's two levels. We have to use our common sense and then our web sense to some extent. So in terms of a common sense approach to things, with online payments and transactions, there are different levels. So with respect to eBay, Barter for Better Fiji, which is a Facebook group, Barter for Better Tonga, you have person to person. Then you also have business to business, which is like Amazon globally. In Fiji, we have other companies like The Merge, Sprouts, Quartz, etc. And then you have the bigger business to business. So Amazon has a third-party fulfillment. They can provide businesses with product, and so does Alibaba. Now, looking at the three levels, in terms of the more common sense approach, just like dealing with the fellow down the street, and when you're purchasing something, it's good to ask questions. Is it my size? Is this the quality level? The quantity? When will it be delivered? Is it gluten-free for those who are gluten intolerant? So just those common sense questions as a kickstart. Secondly, not to go all in on your first online purchase. Don't put your entire bank account on one particular purchase. You might want to test the waters first. Use more trustworthy sites, and those are all very common sense examples. And going back to what the previous speakers were saying about culture, it's great to bring the education and knowledge from these discussions into the culture and into the discussions around the grog bowl, or when you're sitting down with your family and friends later, so that they also start thinking about how to be safer online. Now, after going through those first common sense checks, you have a look at the web sense checks. So the web sense, not so much in a Spider-Man sort of thing, but more along the lines of, if you go to getsafeonline.org, there's an online payments area there, and it has some excellent tips, like don't put, ensure that you have HTTPS and the lock for secure sites. credit card and PayPal is better than using your debit card. Use well-known sites, log out afterwards, keep your receipts, and update your antivirus. So once again, if you're trying to get some indicators on what is reliable, a lot of these sites are fairly reliable, or they would be out of business now. But let's use the common sense first, let's use the web sense second, and let's do these things in a sustainable and safe way.
Thank you, Peter. And just in terms of that discussion around using our common sense and using our web sense, almost, it's almost as if we forget, or we don't really, we just think that everything is the same offline as much as it is online. And so we bring that in. I see that we also want to comment as well from Suetana on that particular topic.
Yes, I think in terms of online payment systems, they in terms of development, they do go through a huge rigorous testing in terms of the audience that they'll be targeting. I know that the one thing I usually do is I put a set of payment platforms in front of my Visa cards, and then have that as the pivot onto the internet. The other part I usually do in terms of restricting maybe an incident that could happen with online payments is dedicate an account. That account, if you want to buy something, you can shift funds from one account in the same bank into that online account, so that if you wanted to buy, say, something that was only 50 tala, you just move 50 tala into that account and then make the payment. So if that account does become breached, you're only going to lose a few tala instead of losing everything that you have in the bank. So it comes back to that understanding of you shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket, and so that plays also into online payments. You always have to know that something will go wrong, and it's a borderless system. So and there's so many moving parts, whether it's the bank, whether it's the payment gateways, whether it's these other service level agreements. Things are changing in the background, and we only see the surface of it on the internet. So if something has changed, those could also have that ripple effect of affecting other systems that those payment gateways depend on. So there are a lot of checks and balances, both from the technical sides as well as from the banking sides. And I know that there are a few questions down the lines in terms of these other areas, but I would strongly advise that if you are the online buyer, have a separate account for those online buying. Arrange your buying that, say, for example, you do online window shopping. Know what you want to buy, know who you're buying it from, and then have that funds available for that account, and then you just transfer it from another account and then make that deposit. And I've been using PayPal, and one of the things that the banks in Samoa do well is if they see an account that has very strange payments, which I've recently been getting calls in terms of a new service that I probably applied to, and the bank say, is this something that you normally pay for? And then you would have to call them back, yes, can you please release the funds for that payment? And then they do release the funds. So it's also having that understanding that the banks have your support in terms of online payment. So just to add in terms of the discussion that we've just had.
Thank you, Suetana. And I note that Peter wanted to also add something into that discussion as well.
Just fully agreeing with Suetana on that's a great idea in terms of having a separate account. I was also just wanting to add on, that's a great segue into the safety of the banks, because they also double check your transaction to make sure that you haven't inadvertently spent on something that you didn't want to. And I get those emails too. With respect to the banks, specifically, they have anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism. They take ID. With mobile money, for example, here in Fiji, we have MyCash at my company, Digicel, and our competitor also has a product, and it uses password and fingerprint identification. And they also show history of use. So history of use is also good to see. Perhaps a small transaction has been clipping away at some of your money over time. But that's all I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's a really good indication of where some of the different collaboration lies. It's not just with the individual, but there are banks who are taking initiatives that they're also able to show their support, that they want their customers to make online payments, but they want their customers to make safe online payments and secure online payments. And so those were really good examples of what that looks like in real life when a bank will or when a bank agent will call you up just to double check and make sure that you actually intended to purchase what the transaction says that you purchased. And so as much as we're hearing a lot about consumers or customers being vigilant and us as individuals being vigilant online with these payments, what are some challenges that we're facing in tackling online scammers? And I'm going to pose that question to our ladies in this conversation. So to Andy, are there experiences to what some of the challenges are, aside from the ones that have been mentioned already with Peter and Suetana?
Thank you, Anne. Yes, in terms of challenges and where scams are involved, from the consumer's perspective, there aren't, we're finding that there are still not a lot of consumers, especially for us in PNG, who are still not informed of what steps to take, especially when it comes to having to seek redress and resolve the issue at hand. They're not really aware that electronic scamming is actually a cybercrime under our laws, and therefore can be reported to the police for further investigation and appropriate action. Another challenge for us is consumer information and empowerment. So just basically outreach programs that seek to educate consumers on the importance of online safety and why it should be important, and not only that, but just having information that's targeted in a way that is helpful and actually easy for them to understand. Obviously, you know, for us, the majority of our population is actually rural based, and there's really a need to engage and get the participation, especially at the community level, for consumers in order to, you know, understand these issues. And another thing is consumer knowledge and skills. So just the ability to actually recognize the red flags. So just actually know, you know, how to identify, you know, if something may be a scam. Basically, if the you know, whether it's by if a message comes from an unknown number, and you know, if the content of that message actually requests some form of upfront payment in order, you know, to claim a prize. So those are some of the challenges. And again, education and awareness is key in this area, because it obviously it's key to educating consumers on the importance of privacy and protecting their personal information. Thanks, Anne.
Thanks, Andy. And just in terms of how people are able to turn to police there in Papua New Guinea, Taj in Fiji, who can people turn to, or what can people do if they are scammed online?
There are a lot of ways where people can usually turn up to. First of all, they can report the scam that had happened with an online seller from the person whom they have bought the item from, or they have done the payment, or the payment transfer system to the company's fraud department. Usually, the companies have their fraud departments within their companies, and maybe they can go ahead and report to their departments, and they can do their assessments and investigations, and how the transaction has been performed, to whom it has been given to, and all the details that the consumer or the individual would require. And if it's related to the credit card or bank account, to pay a scammer, if for instance, if a purchase has been made, or if you have paid to the scammer through a credit card or bank account, it's usually wise to report to the card issuer or the bank itself, because the banks usually have the details of the transactions that has been performed. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. And are there specific organizations or institutions in Samoa, other than the banks themselves, where people can turn to if they are scammed online?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to you need to report it. So if, for example, you're using some online services, you either report it to the police or report it to those to the Ministry of Commerce, Industry, and Labor in terms of their support and how they could combat those scammers. I would also want to share, like, if you are buying things online or using online services, the other thing that you as a user or you as a person can do is actually read the feedbacks and determine if this person has made multiple purchases. And if they haven't, then it clearly shows the sign that they might be a scammer, or they are a new shop online. So reading the feedbacks from previous clients that they had procured from them also assist them in understanding if this is a business that has been going on for quite some time. And so this leads me into look for the businesses that have been active online, and try to engage with them in terms of those initial procurement, because most of these online businesses, they actually have physical stores either in the country they are operating on, and those their clientele will actually overflow into the digital realms, where those will also be provided in terms of the feedback their clients have on the on-site stores.
And that's really good for just across the board to be vigilant and observant on where you're buying and who you're buying from, and being able to see the almost the customer review aspect, or the feedbacks on those buyers or on those sellers, sorry. And just in terms of how we pay for these or make these purchases and pay for these items online, there's been recent discussions in terms of people paying with credit cards, but also delving into cryptocurrency. And so I just wanted to pose the question as well of why back to Samoa, why do you think government prohibits purchase of cryptocurrency?
Well, cryptocurrency itself is a decentralized type of payment system. It uses technology that it might be very difficult for the government to regulate. And cryptocurrency is also a borderless currency, meaning that it spreads across borders, and managing that control in terms of what the cryptocurrency is used for might be a little bit more difficult for the governments to interact with. This is to go back to how the financial system and the flow of money happens on an economic level. So, for example, like if you board a plane from anywhere in the world, you're only allowed to carry a certain amount of physical cash, and that's a restriction because the countries need to know where the cash is going. Is it coming from some sort of criminal activity that you're exiting the country with, or is it going to a criminal activity that you want to develop in another country? So cryptocurrency creates those problems where it's made it easier for maybe the bad people to actually utilize it to move money across borders which also creates a big problem on the economic factors of a country, where with central banks, they're powerless to stop those types of transactions, and it could cause a lot of disruption. So in some way, cryptocurrency provides a good platform for privacy in terms of how you buy and what you buy, but it also creates another problem in terms of how do you manage who's using it? How do you create laws that could govern those transactions that will prevent any criminal activities within the country? So those are some of the reasons why it's quite difficult for government to accept the use of cryptocurrency. But if it was in an area where the region comes together and tries to find ways to regulate it, then it could be a better alternative. But it's a battle that's very difficult to fight.
Mm. And do you find the same sentiments here in Fiji, Peter?
Well, cryptocurrency isn't something we've touched on too strongly in Fiji so far, but there's also, on the flip side, having personally looked at it a few years ago with some of my friends, the crypto exchanges in the US and UK as well don't usually allow purchase from this side of the world, even if you use your credit card and Visa. So, it's a two-way thing. Maybe governments here haven't necessarily allowed it, but at the same time, the exchanges a couple of years ago didn't necessarily allow it either. That might have changed now though. But just on the other side of the coin, it's also hard, even if it was allowed here, to purchase it on the other side.
Right. And that's, I mean, we talk about cryptocurrency, but it's this wide experience that's happening sort of in the Northern Hemisphere and here in the South, where just getting used to certain ideas and just getting used to certain topics as well. So maybe just backtracking on, we might not all know what cryptocurrency is, or even how a credit card might be used. Just in particular to the credit cards themselves, we had spoken a lot about how purchases were made, and the suggestion was that we would use our credit cards instead of a debit card. We would sign up for a different account if we could, to be able to put specific amounts of money into that particular account, so that we're not losing all of our money in just one separate account, to the concept of not putting your eggs all in one basket. But how do credit cards actually work, and why do banks or financial institutions make transactions difficult? And just in terms of the experience, what is that like for Samoa, and how do the credit cards work there, and why do you think financial institutions make it difficult to have these transactions?
I think in terms of credit cards, banks across the region as well as the world, they do have networks of their own. These networks have these levels of agreement where there's a certain standard that each bank must meet to actually translate or transfer those transfer between banks, such as these things like Visa cards and MasterCard. These are actually bank networks that a bank needs to apply for, and then from here, it's not so much that it's not so much that transactions are difficult. There's a huge complex system of checks and balances that happen when you are transferring money across the region or the world, so that it's easier to transfer the money. But it's when you have problems along the lines, then that's where the banks are quite careful on, because they would be the ones answering to those people that probably had bank transactions difficulties, and in some ways they might get entangled with legal proceedings that they did not want to anticipate. So in terms of those things like Visa and MasterCard, these are networks that banks apply to. It's similar to today's digital currencies like those cryptocurrencies, they do go through a network, but because the internet has made transactions much more easier, the traditional networks like Visa and Master and Discovery and American Express are starting to be phased out because they are more regulated than the online payment systems. So it's not so much that transactions are difficult. It's just there's a lot of checks and balances that make it complex across the region and on the international scale.
And that's a really good point, just in terms of those checks and balances. They're there to also protect the customer, and they're there to also protect the consumer as well. And so the main idea is that while it might seem difficult to make these transactions because of the different verifications or the different checks and balances, they're really there to protect us. They're really there to be able to safeguard individuals when they're making these purchases. And so just in terms of online payments, we're not only talking about transactions or financial transactions, but you're also sending across your data. You're also sending across your information, your phone number, your birth date. You have a particular PIN that Taj had mentioned on these credit cards. You have particular indicators that are on these or on a credit card or on your PayPal account. And so just in terms of protecting your data and being able to protect the information that's also on there, where is Papua New Guinea and where is Fiji and Samoa in terms of protecting that data? And so where are the different countries when it comes to data protection law? And we'll kick that off with Andy from Papua New Guinea.
Yeah, thank you. And in terms of the laws in PNG, I'll start with the NICT Act 2009. So under the NICT Act, there's actually provisions under Section 70 and 73 where the minister actually has certain powers to actually require operator licensees to disclose certain content or specified communications where there's a public emergency or it's a matter of public safety. We also have what's called the Cybercrime Code Act 2016, which provides provisions for offenses related to the integrity of data and electronic systems or devices. And Part 3 of that act outlines the offenses and penalties for illegal interception, unauthorized hacking, data interference, and system interference. And also, it is compulsory for all SIM holders in PNG to do mandatory SIM registration under our SIM card registration regulation dated 2016 as well. And that regulation basically provides a framework for the registration of all SIM card users, as well as for the control and administration and management of what's referred to as the information database, which is basically a silo for all subscriber data and information. So amongst other things, the SIM card registration is intended to help law enforcement agencies to identify mobile SIM card owners, especially, and to track criminals who obviously conduct illegal activities. And we also have what's called the Consumer Protection Rule, which came about in 2014, which requires licensed retail service providers to make publicly available a consumer guide and with a set amount of minimum information, which should include the policies and processes around how they manage customer information. Including service information. Yes, so that's about it for PNG.
Do we have data protection law updates sort of just in terms of where Fiji and Samoa are with data protection?
Just looking at Fiji, in our Telecommunications Act, we have Section 54, SIM registration legislation, Section 12, and the Banking Act, Section 71. So, broadly, those prohibit the local companies who are licensed in Fiji from providing consumer information. So we must keep it confidential unless it's requested by a lawful authority, such as the police, usually under such. Cybersecurity legislation in the country prohibits hacking. The GDPR, though, which I think we're going to come to next, is a slightly different thing, but we can discuss that more in the next segment. But in terms of Fiji's data protection, locally there is a minimum threshold already, and we can talk about the next phase a bit later.
In terms of Samoa's data protection, I do understand that there are elements of data protection in many of the laws that both the Telecommunication Act as well as the business side of things. But it's also come to the government's attention that there has to be some sort of consolidation in terms of data protection that can be developed into a concise act. So there are developments in the works in terms of unifying those areas to be legislation itself, and then bringing those together into one legislation where it addresses data protection across the various different types of data standards and platforms that the government and the private sector will be developing in the near future. We know that many of the projects that are happening digitally will also target those elements of data protection, and addressing those areas would also see data protection legislation be revised for Samoa in the coming days. We do have some work in terms of digital projects that are in the pipeline, such as the Freedom of Information Act that we are currently trying to move towards. This is basically in terms of addressing online information from both public and private, and how those could be well developed in terms of who owns the data, who needs to share the data, and who gets authorization on sharing those information. Samoa also has endeavored to develop its national ID infrastructure, and through that national ID, many of the public information that the population will be sharing would also be going into a national ID legislation, which is currently being reviewed and will be sent through to the government and through Parliament, and then on its final stage be developed as a national legislation that will mainly focus on how to manage those population information for the government. So there are a lot of elements of data privacy legislation across the different legislation that the government has, and we from Samoa are looking at trying to consolidate that into one act.
Thank you for that. And we can see that there's such a general response to protecting this data and to be able to protect our citizens and safeguard individuals online. And so we can see that there's really great initiatives all across the region. And so with the different countries, I will touch back on this topic just as we're coming to the end of our time as well. We'll touch back on this topic of the GDPR, which you had raised, Peter. And so what is the GDPR for our audience, and where is Fiji, or where is the region at with this particular interaction with this legislation?
The GDPR is data protection regulation from the European Union. It's 11 chapters, about 99 articles. It's quite a comprehensive document, and it deals with a provider of data. So us as subjects, we can access what a service provider is holding, or controller or processor. We can rectify or erase that data. but it's something that is very comprehensive. It's something that here in the Pacific, we have to see if we have the capacity, get the different ways of working aligned with those who control and process the data, like the internet giants of Facebook and Amazon and eBay, and see where those structures of alignment can come from before we necessarily jump all the way into something that robust. In the markets that I work with, I don't think there's anything as substantial as that currently. And it would be great to see a bit of discussion on what level would suit the Pacific.
Thank you. And I think that's a great segue out, as that would lead to more discussion, I'm sure. But there's definitely an initiative to want the conversation to start when it comes to data protection. I think that we all have experiences in sort of online payments and being able to be safe online. But when it comes to the actual data and protecting just the most simple information we might think, such as somebody's name or somebody's age, or even somebody's phone number that could link to several other information. And so coming into that discussion as well, it would be great for a more regional, more robust discussion because of such a wide scope of the GDPR and other data protection laws. But just in terms of our Q&A, I do know that we have a short time here to answer audience questions. And so we're rounding out to 10 minutes. But there is a question from our audience that we'll go ahead and give to Peter. But the question is, some of the biggest challenges in the Pacific region is a payment gateway, and so, or a payment gateway service provider. And so speaking as from your experience, if there is any available, and so I think the question is there any payment gateway service provider available here in the Pacific region?
Okay, so not universally. So payment gateways you can leverage are mostly the banks. So the banks are able to give you a payment gateway into their particular accounts, but not necessarily all the accounts. Though that should become a bit easier with Fiji. They're seeking to implement a national switch with the Reserve Bank in terms of the ability to move funds to different accounts a lot easier from wherever you are. But to my knowledge, I can't think of one that would be absolutely usable. So this is from a retailer point of view. So if I had a pizza business or something like that, where everybody could easily make payment in, not that I can think of at the moment. Sorry, Hank, what was that?
Just in terms of that discussion, are there also any questions that, or not any questions, but are there any experiences with this in Samoa?
Samoa is trying to develop its payment gateway through the central banks, but the hard thing about it is the buy-in from those who use it. So I don't know of any other systems or countries that are trying to implement this, but payment gateway, it would heavily depend on a country having the right infrastructure to develop on. And it also comes back to the question of supply and demand. Is there enough people or businesses that would go online for that to happen? And from there, are there enough platforms that will utilize it? Because with a payment gateway, there is a huge cost in terms of its security and the functions and the protection it needs. And to be sustainable, the demand has to be quite high. And if we're trying to develop regional capacity on digital platforms, those need to be addressed before the flow of data could actually be more valuable in terms of a payment gateway. One lesson that I have seen is the use of ATMs. The banks are still struggling to get people to use bank cards as a way of payment at supermarkets or at stores. People still prefer the cash, the hard cash to pay for their items. So once that cultural change and mindset to actually translate from an analog set of interactions at the store to a digital one where you're no longer paying with cash, but paying with maybe a credit card to start with, then those areas of payment gateway will become more relevant as the demand grows, because people now have the sustainable sustainable support to build those new functions into our digital society.
That's a great point, just in terms of how it is that we're making these payments as well. And just this idea that a lot of us want to still hold the cash and still hold the coins to be able to make a transaction or to know that we've made a transaction. And so just in terms of a last question from the audience, going back to this verification process and these identification process, how do we verify the identity of, say, a mainland Chinese registered company before actually paying out an invoice from a business perspective? So I'll pose that question back to Peter.
Well, specifically in terms of a mainland China entity, that's a bit difficult. I mean, you got Alibaba there, and they have manufacturers, and those manufacturers are throughout China, so it's a little bit difficult to discern sometimes. I think that just comes with that common sense view, reading the reviews and making sure that you adhere to the common sense and web sense tips. It's always good if you know someone who's used a particular supplier before, of course. And they can be safe, but just take the correct precautions. It's also good to remember that a lot of these online payment mechanisms, they also have what you call dispute resolution policies and returns policies. And so Alibaba has transaction dispute rules. Amazon has returns policies. eBay likely has the same, but they have certain things that you have to give. So transaction details, and you must give it within a certain amount of time. So whenever you're maybe spending a bit more money than you can lose, in that sense, it's always good to know what you might have to do if things go bad after doing your due diligence.
That's true. And just I think piggybacking off of due diligence and on a separate note, is there any advice sort of just in general from anybody in terms of a way to be notified immediately if your account gets hacked? And I would assume that these would be your payment accounts, but especially for business accounts. So the question came in that business accounts which have their funds in one account, bank notifications might actually be delayed. And so is there sort of a way that you might think that we could get immediate update. And this is despite somebody being safe online and using all the antivirus mechanisms possible to be safe. And so are there any comments just around the screen in terms of ways that we could get immediately notified if possible?
In terms of the question, I think in terms of how immediate do you, when an account is breached, sometimes it takes sometimes for those who are either the banks or the financial institute to actually verify there has been some problems in terms of a breach. So I would say that the banks would probably be probably the best people that would advise in terms of this. I know that they have the necessary systems that would flag certain fraudulent activities within in their systems across multiple areas. They do also have thresholds that these systems are monitoring in terms of anomalies that might arise within the bank systems that they house. I do believe also that they have regular audits of the systems to prevent such activities from happening. And for us in Samoa, there haven't been any major breaches in terms of those, which also identifies that the banks are also following strict procedures and international standards of how money is being kept and how money is being transferred from one account to another, and how online payments are actually happening. From my experience, I use one of the regional banks, and the regional banks have had a lot of advice in terms of how to be safe online in terms of making payments and how to get notified in terms of any transaction that a user might do online for any items that they procure. But in terms of immediate notification, I think the best thing on this is the banks would probably have your best interest in all that they do in terms of notifying you as soon as something has come up.
And that's a really good point. And I note that we're coming into our time, so unless anybody has anything else to add to that particular question, we're going to round out this conversation with an Ambassador Day note that's coming up. And so just in terms of what is the Ambassador Day, and before we get into that, we have one more question. So one more audience question, and that will be I'm going to direct this question to Peter if possible, but if any of you in your respective countries, if you know of any local banks that provide payment gateway, and which is the most reliable or secure if somebody is looking to integrate it to their website. So if there's one in particular for Fiji, Samoa, or Papua New Guinea.
I'm not too much of a technical fellow. Maybe Santana or Andy might be a bit better placed to answer fully. The best I can say is, as Santana has already said, there is a minimum that the banking regulators require, minimum standard of security, which they would all meet already. And most banks would at least consider payment gateway. But I couldn't necessarily recommend a particular one in each country. And the cost and other implications, I'm not too sure about. Apologies.
No worries.
So in terms of payment gateways, I think internally some banks might have them, But we've also seen that some telco companies are also developing new digital payment gateways, which is they are from there. They actually operate similar to the banks in terms of digital funds transfer. I know in Samoa we have Digital Money, which is one of the services that Digital promotes. You can send remittance locally in terms of this. And they are also working on having this on a regional level where you can send money from between digital providers in the different economies. We also have Mtala, which is a product I believe it's from Fiji, but it's been rebranded through Vodafone. These online payment solutions, in terms of reliability, those are quite reliable in terms of the reliability part mainly heavily concentrates on connectivity. If your connections are good, then the reliability is there. In terms of secure, I might not say secure would be a good word in this area. Maybe trusted would be something more relevant. Security is it's a 99.999% a kind of understanding. You cannot get 100%. There's always that 1% failover, and so maybe trusted is a good thing. So I would say that if you have a digital payment solutions, then the companies that provide it locally, those would be the best solutions to go for. And if you want to use international type of payment solutions such as PayPal, Alipay, and others, those are well recognized as well because they have gone through a lot of rigorous testing across the multiple economies, and because of that, different economies have different laws, and those laws enact on how those payment gateways or payment solutions are established in each country. And so their experience greatly has a bigger influence in terms of verifying and putting trust in their services. So for the Pacific, I think using local services that are available, because you can just walk down to the store and say, why isn't my 5 tala that was transferred from my family in this region not coming? Whereas if you're trying to do that online, it's a nightmare. So using local services not only provides you with the economic incentives, but it also provides you the insurance that you can just go and scream at somebody at one of those technical stores in terms of fixing it on right away. So in terms of that, I think those are my comments on that question.
Just wanting to fully agree with Sultana in terms of using local, and also in terms of mobile money, businesses can be added as what's called a biller to the MyCash or the equivalent. So with Digital, we can add you as a biller so that we can pay bills to the organization. There's also a QR code mechanism, so merchants can have this at their premises, scan and make an easy payment as well, as easy as an FPOS or perhaps easier, because it only requires fingerprint or password. It's quite seamless. So there are things that can be done in that space as well.
Perfect. And if there's anything else that anyone else would like to add to that discussion. So we know that for payment gateways, or at least go local, go local and go regional, but just make sure that you're being safe all around, and we know that secure might not be the word, but at least you know that you're using trusted vendors or trusted aspects that you can rock up to their businesses in your local country, in your local city or town, to be able to interact with them physically as well. With that, we're going to round out this webinar and this conversation. Thank you so much to all the panelists. And we have the Get Safe Online Ambassador Day that's coming up. And to talk to us a little bit with a few minutes left is Tajeshwari and Andy in their respective countries. So Taj, would you like to tell us what is Ambassador Day and what can we look forward to here in Fiji? And Andy for Papua New Guinea.
Ambassadors Day, yeah. So here in Fiji, we know that Ambassadors Day will be celebrated on Saturday, the 27th of February at 11 a.m. Fiji time. Basically, Ambassadors Day is this is a call to action for audience to pass on the safety tips, and it's a tell 10 system or hashtag that we are going to do, and in a way that we are going to tell 10 and the 10 will tell another 10, and then it's gonna pass on. So these ambassadors would be presenting through the webinar on in terms of the safety tips, giving their sessions and telling the general audience on how to be safe online in terms of online payments, password protections, and other authentications that the measures that can be taken throughout the processing of payments and other stuffs on being online. There are also social media aspects as well, which can be covered through the Get Safe Online ambassador schemes. So yes, you can go and register through maybe the Facebook page. They will give the Zoom link and you can register. I think it's for the general audience, and people can come and join us, and there will be a lots of safety measures given to the general public to how you can be safe online.
Awesome. And do we have a particular event that's taking place in Papua New Guinea for Ambassador Day?
Thanks, Anne. So everyone can probably see my background as me promoting Safer Internet Day. And we are currently going through a month-long campaign in PNG for the month of February with regards to Safer Internet Day. We actually had a commemorative activity on the 9th of February in launching Safer Internet Day by our good Minister for ICT. And during the launching, he also acknowledged some key partnerships that we have through the established PNG Safer Internet Committee, which includes Get Safe Online amongst others. So as part of the commemorative activities throughout the month of February, a few of our locally trained GSO ambassadors will be undertaking various awareness outreach programs, probably via Zoom, in order to reach out to their various networks and communities on the 27th of Feb. Thanks, Anne.
Thanks, Andy. And that brings us to a close. Thank you again to our audience for joining us, and a special thanks to our 4 amazing panelists from Samoa, Papua New Guinea, and here in Fiji. Again, don't forget to tune in to Get Safe Online Ambassador Day happening this Saturday. Check your local times, available on your Get Safe Online Facebook pages and your Get Safe Online websites. Thank you again, and have a good afternoon to everyone.